I want to bring in Steve Day on this morning, a retired officer from JTF-2, that Special Elite Operations Force of the Canadian Armed Forces. He is the founder now and the president of Radical Ventures Canada, and he's in Kingston, Ontario. Steve, good to see you this morning, and thank you for the time.
Okay.
Listening to the mayor there of Kyiv praising the citizenry for taking up arms, for doing whatever they can to defend their homes, but also working alongside the Ukrainian soldier, the forces which have really earned the praise from, again, as I said, people all around the world. As a former soldier, let me start our conversation right there. What are you seeing in the fight of the Ukrainian soldier?
Well, what I'm seeing in the Ukrainian soldiers, the citizens, the mayor, the president, is a rare form of just leadership under fire, under an unbelievable duress, and the human spirit standing up to stand proud for their country. Now, is that going to be enough to get everything done? I don't know, but it is absolutely inspiring what we're seeing on the ground today.
It is in the face of a formidable foe, as you well know, and I want to bring in the pictures that we have. No new satellite images from yesterday or this morning of the convoy, but we'll bring in the latest that we have, this massive 65-kilometer-long convoy of Russian military vehicles on its way to Kyiv. When you look at these satellite images from your trained eye, what do you see here?
Well, I think what we're beginning to really see now after 7 or 8 days of the ground phase, if you will, the contours of an emerging larger Russian strategy. And so the military campaign right now has probably got about 3 or 4 phases, right? The initial phases would have been intelligence and special operations and or specialized paramilitary forces going in early before the conflict started and doing all the reconnaissance of the various targets to prep for where we're coming up to. The second phase would have been this containment and isolation and bounding, if you will, and minimizing the tactical military problem, which is largely centered on the regime, the Ukrainian leadership piece, as we're talking about. We're now entering the phase where they're going to encircle a number of these cities. And as we've seen in various conflicts over the last 20 years, when you get into built-up areas, you need a lot of combat power. You need a lot of combat supplies to enable those attacking forces to move through that built-up area. So what we're seeing with the Russian convoy, these are all preparatory moves on the ground inside their theater of operations, which tells me sometime within the next 24 to 96 hours, they will start to move to the last phase, which will be regime change, removing those key leaders so that potentially the system then can destabilize.
But right now, what we're hearing again from U.S. officials is that convoy is stalled, is the word they used. It's not going anywhere, and it hasn't for the last 24 hours, and they're looking to potential logistics issues, even like shortages of fuel and food, not to mention that Ukrainian resistance. So what does that suggest to you about the strength of the Russian mission and plan and strategy? Is it not going as planned? I mean, they don't even control any of the cities at this point 1 week in.
Right. So interestingly, though, this is, again, still very early. Right? We're in the first period of a hockey game, for lack of a better analogy. It's early times. Yes, they are stopped. They're very much administratively postured on those highways. The vehicles are very close together, which tells me they're not really under direct threat, or they're not necessarily worried about being attacked in mass. So could they be facing logistical challenges? Absolutely, because the 10th principle of war is administration and logistics. If you get that wrong, your combat power grounds to a halt. So they could be just doing a reset as they get ready to culminate here and move into the major urban centers.
So as they just sit there, that was a question of mine. This is a massive target, one would think, just sitting there. Is there nothing that can be done from the air to hit that massive convoy?
Well, even though we know that air supremacy right now is not in place, localized air superiority for the Russians appear to be in place. So it's very hard to attack those convoys from the air if you don't have air superiority or air supremacy. So the Ukrainian Air Force and air forces is not large enough to fight in that contested space against a very professional Russian combat air patrol and the air defense apron they've got over top of it.
So when that convoy does eventually reach the capital, What will it look like, that urban warfare in the capital city? Nearly 3 million people are normally there. What would that look like, Steve?
It will be absolutely horrendous if the population rises up to fight. So you will see indiscriminate artillery fire, because the Russian backbone of their military is armored forces, artillery forces, missile forces. And they will start raining down from the air an unbelievable amount of firepower and fires to kind of suppress and allow them to make entry into the cities.
How much loss of life should we expect to see?
Again, if the Ukrainian forces decide to fight, it'll be horrendous. So 3 million people against a force of, let's just say, rough math, 50,000, 20,000 Russian forces. You're talking thousands of casualties and killed over a week or two of combat. This could drag on for months if, big if, the Ukrainians are sustained in that fight.
So that's another question. Sustained by what? Is this a place, if it's in the streets, if it is that type of urban warfare, the help that Canada, for example, has contributed to this point, is that where we would see that Canadian weaponry in place? Will that be sufficient, or in that type of battle is more required?
More will be required. The right pieces are being supplied. The anti-tank, anti-armor, bunker-busting Carl G's is a fantastic two-person weapon system. But they're going to need more, because as they get encircled, then the supply lines into those built-up areas get choked off, and it becomes a siege, if you will, and the Russians can choke off those cities, which is why with the forces they have arrayed, they're not really worried about the rural parts of the country. They're trying to choke off and collapse the regime in Kyiv and those other major metropolitan areas. It's my assessment.
If you're a Ukrainian commander, what are you devising at this point in general, but even with a view to lasting long enough for sanctions to take full effect?
So again, from a pure military perspective, you need to be able to sustain your combat power. You need to make sure you choose the time and place that you're going to strike, because they've got limited resources and they are truly up against a Russian military machine that, relatively speaking, has got unlimited resources. The Russians control the borders. The Russians are right next door. They can continue to sustain their combat power, while the Ukrainians, those paramilitary forces, those civilians, are going to have a very tough challenge if this drags into a month, 2, 3 months. And we only need to look at our recent experience in Iraq and Afghanistan and across the Middle East and Syria. If you look at Afghanistan as a perfect example, largely 40 million people, Ukraine, 40 million people. Afghanistan, 600,000 square kilometers, plus or minus. Ukraine, 600,000 square kilometers, plus or minus. And look at the challenges we had as a Western military with a government on our side to defeat an insurgency over 20 years.
Steve Day, thank you very much. As Russia takes that war into Ukraine's cities, we really appreciate your helping us understand what we may be seeing in, as you say, 24 to 96 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather.